The blood-red sunset painted the Colorado sky as Victoria Farrow stumbled down the dusty main street of Las Animas, clutching a tattered carpet bag in one hand and wiping angry tears with the other. Whispers followed her like a plague, townspeople ducking into doorways and behind wagons to avoid contact with the woman they'd branded sinful beyond redemption. "There she goes," hissed Mabel Henderson from behind her handkerchief. "Got herself with child and no husband to claim it. Disgraceful." Victoria kept her eyes forward, her back straight despite the crushing weight of shame. At 22, she had once been Las Animas's respected schoolteacher, daughter of the late Reverend Farrow. Now, 6 months pregnant and unwed, she had been dismissed from her position and evicted from the teacherage that had been her home. "Best you leave town, Miss Farrow," Mayor Phillips had told her that morning, refusing to meet her eyes. "Your condition sets a poor example for the children." The school board has unanimously decided. Victoria's boots kicked up dust as she approached the edge of town. Where would she go? The nearest settlement was 40 miles away, and the stagecoach wouldn't take her, not in her condition, not with her reputation. The child within her kicked, as if sensing her distress. "Hold up there, Miss Farrow." The deep voice startled her. She turned to find Jacob Zimmerman sitting tall on his chestnut stallion, the setting sun casting his features in sharp relief. At 28, the cattle rancher was known throughout Las Animas County for his fair dealings and quiet strength. His ranch, the Double Z, lay 5 miles outside of town. "Mr. Zimmerman," she acknowledged, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dirt. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "I heard what happened at the town meeting," he said, his blue eyes meeting hers directly, unlike everyone else who'd averted their gaze for months. "Where are you headed?" Victoria swallowed hard. "I don't know," she admitted. "They've given me until sundown to be gone." Jacob's jaw tightened. "That ain't right." "Right or wrong, it's done," she replied, shifting her weight as her back ached from the day's strain. "I've brought shame on myself." Jacob shook his head, replacing his hat. "Shame's a funny thing in this town, seems to fall harder on some than others." He glanced back toward the town, where curious onlookers had gathered at a distance. "My ranch needs a housekeeper. I can offer you room and board and fair wages." Victoria's eyes widened. "Mr. Zimmerman, you can't possibly—" "I can and I am," he interrupted. "Unless you've got someplace better to be." She clutched her bag tighter. "People will talk." A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "People already talk, Miss Farrow." He extended a hand toward his horse. "My housekeeper's cabin sits a good distance from the main house." "You'll have your privacy." Victoria hesitated. Jacob Zimmerman had always been kind to her during her 2 years in Las Animas, tipping his hat when they passed on the street, attending the school Christmas pageants with generous donations. But this would only fuel the gossip mill. "I don't need charity, Mr. Zimmerman." "It's not charity, it's a job offer," he replied firmly. "And it's getting dark. Decision time, Miss Farrow." Behind them, she could hear the murmurs growing louder. A group of men had emerged from the saloon, pointing in her direction. "There she is." "Town council said she was supposed to be gone by now," one called out. Jacob stepped between Victoria and the approaching men. His hand didn't move toward his holstered gun, but the mere suggestion of his imposing figure made the men hesitate. "Miss Farrow is employed by the Double Z Ranch now," Jacob announced, his voice carrying across the distance. "She's leaving town as requested, gentlemen." Victoria felt tears threatening again, this time from relief mingled with humiliation. "Very well, Mr. Zimmerman," she said quietly. "I accept your offer." With practiced ease, Jacob helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite their proximity. "Hold tight," he murmured, and with a click of his tongue they were off, leaving the gawking townspeople and Victoria's former life behind. The ride to the Double Z was silent but for the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional cry of a nighthawk. Victoria tried to sit straight, uncomfortable with the intimacy of their shared saddle. "May I ask you a question, Mr. Zimmerman?" she finally said as they crested a hill that revealed the sprawling ranch below. "Jacob," he corrected. "And yes, why are you helping me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, softly, "Because no one helped my sister when she needed it." The words hung in the cooling evening air. Victoria didn't press for details. The Double Z ranch came into full view, a substantial main house, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a large barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. At the edge of the property stood a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. "Your quarters," Jacob explained, guiding the horse toward it. "Mrs. Winters, my cook, has been staying there, but she'll be moving to the room off the kitchen in the main house. She's expecting you." As they approached, the cabin door opened, revealing a plump woman in her 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression. "So this is our new housekeeper," Mrs. Winters called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time we had proper help around here. These cowboys make more mess than a herd of buffalo." Jacob helped Victoria dismount, steadying her when her legs wobbled from the long ride. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Victoria Farrow," Jacob said. "Miss Farrow, Mrs. Edith Winters runs my kitchen, and now you'll be running my household." Edith Winters studied Victoria from head to toe, her gaze lingering on her swollen midsection. But unlike the townspeople, there was no judgment in her eyes, only practical assessment. "You look dead on your feet, girl," she said briskly. "Come inside. I've got stew on and fresh bread. We'll talk duties tomorrow." Victoria felt the first real sense of relief she'd experienced in months. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." "Thank the boss," Edith replied, nodding toward Jacob. "He's the one who rode into town like a madman when he heard what those sanctimonious fools were planning." Victoria turned to Jacob, questions in her eyes. "Get some rest," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. "We'll talk tomorrow." As he rode toward the main house, Victoria watched him go, wondering what kind of man would risk his own reputation to help a fallen woman. The cabin was small but clean, with a bedroom, a sitting area with a stone fireplace, and a modest kitchen. The furniture was sturdy and practical: a bed with a quilt, a rocking chair, a table with 2 chairs, and a chest of drawers. "It's not fancy," Edith said as she ladled stew into a bowl, "but it's warm in winter and cool enough in summer." "It's more than I deserve," Victoria replied honestly, sinking into a chair at the table. Edith snorted. "Nonsense. Everyone deserves a roof over their head." She placed the bowl in front of Victoria. "Eat. That baby needs nourishment." Victoria took a spoonful of the rich stew, nearly moaning at the taste after weeks of barely eating due to stress. "Mrs. Winters, may I ask, does Mr. Zimmerman make a habit of taking in strays?" Edith sat across from her with her own bowl. "Jacob Zimmerman is the finest man in Colorado Territory, and that's God's truth. Lost his parents young, raised his sister by himself, built this ranch from nothing." She took a bite before continuing. "He doesn't talk much about his sister. She got in a family way some years back. The father wouldn't marry her. Town turned against her. She—" Edith paused, lowering her voice. "She took her own life." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. "How terrible!" It near broke him. He was off driving cattle to Kansas City when it happened. Edith shook her head sadly. So no, he doesn't make a habit of charity cases, but he knows what it is to see someone you love pushed to the edge by small-minded folks. The revelation made Victoria see her benefactor in a new light. His kindness wasn't casual generosity, it was born of profound loss. "Now," Edith said, changing the subject, "your duties will be straightforward enough. Keep the main house tidy, do the washing, mending, that sort of thing. Jacob's got 8 men working for him full-time, more during roundup. I do the cooking, but you'll help with that when needed. And after—" Victoria gestured to her belly. Edith's eyes softened. "After the baby comes, we'll figure it out. Jacob said the position includes care for your child. He's having the ranch hands build a cradle already." Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes. After months of condemnation, such simple kindness was overwhelming. "Get some sleep, dear," Edith said, patting her hand. "Tomorrow's soon enough to start your new life." That night, in the strange but comfortable bed, Victoria dreamed not of the shame and rejection she'd endured, but of blue eyes that looked at her without judgment. Morning came early at the Double Z. Victoria woke to rooster crows and the distant sound of men calling to each other as they began the day's work. She dressed carefully in one of her 2 remaining presentable dresses, high-necked, with enough room to accommodate her growing child. A knock at the door revealed Jacob, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Farrow. Thought I'd show you around before you start your duties." "Good morning, Mr. Zimmerman Jacob," she corrected when he raised an eyebrow. "I'd appreciate that." He offered his arm, which she took after a moment's hesitation. The contact felt improper, yet necessary given her awkward balance these days. The tour was comprehensive. Jacob showed her the main house, a surprisingly comfortable 2-story structure with a formal parlor, dining room, kitchen, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. The furnishings were solid and masculine, but Victoria immediately saw ways to bring warmth to the spaces. "It needs a woman's touch," Jacob admitted as they walked through. "My sister did what she could, but since she's been gone—" He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "The men's quarters are off limits unless you're delivering clean linens. Mrs. Winters will show you that routine." They moved outside, where Jacob pointed out the various ranch buildings, the smithy, the tack room, the storage buildings, the barn. Ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully as they passed, eyeing Victoria with curiosity, but not the malice she'd grown accustomed to in town. "The men know you're here as my housekeeper," Jacob said quietly. "They've been instructed to treat you with respect." "And do they always follow your instructions?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. A rare smile crossed Jacob's face. "They do if they want to keep their jobs." They stopped at the corral where a cowboy was breaking a spirited paint horse. "That's my foreman, Tom Becker," Jacob explained. "Been with me since I started the ranch. He's married to Mrs. Winters's daughter. They live in town." Victoria watched the skilled horsemanship with appreciation. "You have a beautiful property, Jacob. You should be proud." "It's a work in progress," he replied, leaning against the fence. "Started with 50 acres and 20 head of cattle. Now it's 5,000 acres and near 1,000 head. Impressive for a man so young," he shrugged. "I'm 28, not that young." "Still," Victoria insisted, "it's quite an achievement." Jacob studied her for a moment. "Miss Farrow, Victoria, I want to be clear about something. Your position here is secure regardless of what happened in Las Animas. Your past is your own business." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, but I'm not hiding from what I did. I made a mistake, trusted the wrong man. He promised marriage, then disappeared when I told him about the baby." She straightened her shoulders. "I don't expect sympathy, but I won't be treated as if I've committed some unforgivable sin, either." Jacob's expression hardened. "Who was he?" The question took her by surprise. "I don't see how that matters now. It matters if he's a man I do business with. Victoria shook her head. He was passing through. A cattle buyer from Chicago. Said his name was Walter Preston, though I doubt that was true. Jacob's jaw worked silently for a moment. Well, whoever he was, he's a coward. And the town's reaction says more about them than it does about you. The conviction in his voice warmed something in Victoria that had been cold for months. Now, he continued, I've got work to do. Mrs. Winters will show you your duties. If you need anything, you come to me directly. With that, he strode off toward the cattle pens, leaving Victoria to ponder the enigmatic man who had rescued her from disgrace. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at the Double Z. Victoria threw herself into her duties, grateful for the physical work that kept her mind occupied and her body active despite her advancing pregnancy. She scrubbed floors, polished furniture, washed and mended clothes, and brought order to the bachelor-run household. Jacob was often away during daylight hours, riding the property, working with the cattle, or handling business in neighboring towns. But each evening, he would take dinner in the main house, where Victoria served the meal Mrs. Winters prepared. These dinners became a curious ritual. Jacob would inquire about her day, ask if she needed anything for her work, occasionally sharing news from beyond the ranch. He never mentioned Las Animas or her condition directly, but his eyes often rested on her growing belly with an expression Victoria couldn't decipher. One evening in her third week at the Double Z, Victoria was serving coffee after dinner when a sharp pain caused her to gasp and nearly drop the pot. Jacob was on his feet instantly, taking the coffee from her hands. "What is it?" "The baby." Victoria shook her head, embarrassed. "Just a twinge." The doctor in Las Animas said it's normal at this stage. "You've seen a doctor?" His relief was evident. "Yes, before." She didn't need to finish. "Before they cast me out hung in the air between them." Jacob frowned. "When was the last time?" "Nearly 2 months ago." "That won't do," he said decisively. "I'll ride into Pueblo tomorrow and fetch Dr. Miller. He comes out for the hands when needed." "That's not necessary," Victoria protested. "I'm fine, truly." "It's not up for discussion," Jacob replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Sit down before you fall down." Victoria obeyed, secretly relieved. The pains had been coming more frequently lately, and she'd been worried about facing childbirth alone. True to his word, Jacob returned the next day with Dr. Miller, a kindly older man who examined Victoria with professional detachment. "Everything appears normal, Miss Farrow," he announced afterward. "The baby is in the correct position. I'd say you have about 6 more weeks before delivery." "Thank you, doctor," Victoria said, adjusting her dress. "I'll check back in 3 weeks," Dr. Miller promised, packing his bag. "And Mr. Zimmerman knows how to reach me if anything changes before then." After the doctor left, Victoria found Jacob waiting on the porch of the main house. "All is well?" he asked, rising from his chair. "Yes, thank you for arranging the visit." Jacob nodded. "I've been thinking. You'll need help when the time comes. I've sent word to Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife. She's attended many births. She's agreed to stay here when you get closer to your time." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes at this thoughtfulness. "Jacob, I don't know how to thank you." He looked uncomfortable with her emotion. "No need for thanks, just doing what's right." "What's right would have been leaving me to my fate," Victoria said softly. "What you're doing goes well beyond that." Jacob's gaze met hers, something unreadable in his expression. "Maybe I'm just making up for not being there when my sister needed me." Before Victoria could respond, he touched his hat and walked away, effectively ending the conversation. As autumn progressed, Victoria's belly grew rounder, and the landscape around the Double Z turned golden. The days grew shorter, and the nights cooler. Jacob ordered extra blankets for her cabin and had the ranch hands stock a generous woodpile by her door. It was during this time that Victoria began to notice the townspeople from Las Animas occasionally visiting the ranch. First came Pastor Williams, ostensibly to discuss a donation for the church roof. He barely acknowledged Victoria as she served him tea, but his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. Then came Mayor Phillips and his wife, inquiring about cattle prices. Mrs. Phillips made a point of asking Jacob, within Victoria's hearing, if he was concerned about the moral atmosphere of his household. Jacob's reply was cold and precise. "I'm more concerned with the moral atmosphere of a town that would cast out a woman in need, Mrs. Phillips." The mayor and his wife left shortly afterward, tight-lipped and offended. The most difficult visit came from Mrs. Henderson, Victoria's former landlady and the most notorious gossip in Las Animas. "Mr. Zimmerman," she simpered as Victoria showed her into the parlor, "I've come to warn you about the woman you've taken in. Do you know the full extent of her shame?" Victoria froze in the doorway, her heart pounding. Jacob rose slowly from his desk. "Mrs. Henderson, Miss Farrow is my employee and under my protection. Whatever you've come to say, you can say it in front of her or not at all." Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Very well. Did she tell you that the man who fathered her child was married? That she knowingly carried on with another woman's husband?" Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not true. He told me he was a widower." "Convenient," Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "But his actual wife arrived in Las Animas looking for him just last week. Showed us a daguerreotype and everything. Several people recognized him as your gentleman caller." Victoria gripped the doorframe, feeling sick. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know." Jacob moved to stand beside her, his presence steady. "Mrs. Henderson, you've delivered your message. Now I'll ask you to leave my home." "You're harboring a home wrecker, Mr. Zimmerman," the woman insisted. "What will people say?" "I don't much care what people say," Jacob replied evenly. "Tom will show you out." As if summoned, the foreman appeared behind Mrs. Henderson. "This way, madam." When they were gone, Victoria collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking. "Jacob, I swear to you, I didn't know he was married. He said his wife had died in childbirth 2 years prior. He even showed me a locket with her picture." Jacob knelt beside her chair. "I believe you." "You do?" She looked up, startled. "Yes." His eyes were steady on hers. "You're many things, Victoria Farrow, but I don't believe you're a liar or a home wrecker." Relief washed through her, followed immediately by renewed shame. "But it doesn't change anything, does it? Married or not, I still—" She couldn't finish. Jacob took her hand the first time he had deliberately touched her since helping her from his horse that first night. "It changes how you should see yourself. You were deceived by a practiced liar. That doesn't make you fallen or sinful." His touch was warm and reassuring, his calloused palm enveloping her smaller hand. Victoria found herself unable to look away from his face, seeing there not the judgment she feared, but something that looked remarkably like admiration. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities, until the baby kicked sharply, making Victoria gasp. Jacob withdrew his hand. "You should rest. Don't let that woman's venom upset you further." Victoria nodded, struggling to her feet. "Thank you for believing me." He smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. "Thank you for giving me something worth believing in." The words followed Victoria back to her cabin, warming her more effectively than the fire she built in the hearth. That night, a fierce autumn storm swept across the prairie. Thunder boomed and lightning split the sky as rain pounded against Victoria's cabin. She lay awake, one hand on her restless belly, listening to the elemental fury outside. A particularly violent crack of thunder shook the cabin, and Victoria sat up in alarm as she heard what sounded like a tree splintering nearby. Moments later, a hammering at her door sent her scrambling for her robe. "Victoria, are you all right?" Jacob's voice carried through the door, urgent with concern. She opened it to find him drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. "I'm fine," she assured him. "What happened?" "Lightning struck the old oak by your cabin. Part of it came down on your roof." He glanced upward. "I need to check the damage." Victoria stepped back to let him in, suddenly aware of her state of undress and unbound hair. Jacob seemed equally aware, his eyes skimming over her before deliberately focusing on the ceiling. "There," he pointed to a corner where rainwater had begun to seep through. "It's not bad, but you can't stay here tonight. Grab what you need. You'll take my room in the main house." "But where will you sleep?" Victoria asked, already reaching for her clothing. "I'll bunk with the men," he said simply. "Hurry now." 10 minutes later, they were making a dash through the downpour to the main house, Jacob holding a blanket over Victoria's head in a futile attempt to keep her dry. They burst through the kitchen door, both soaking wet and breathless. Mrs. Winters, awakened by the commotion, appeared in her nightgown and wrapper. "Goodness gracious! What's happened?" "Tree damage to the cabin roof," Jacob explained, taking Victoria's bundle from her. "Miss Farrow needs dry clothes and a warm bed." "Of course," the cook replied, immediately taking charge. "Come with me, dear. I'll find you something to change into." Upstairs, in what was clearly the master bedroom, Victoria changed into a nightgown Mrs. Winters provided one of her daughters, she explained while the older woman built up the fire. "The boss is sweet on you," Mrs. Winters remarked casually as she turned down the bed. Victoria nearly dropped the hairbrush she'd been using. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me," the cook replied with a knowing smile. "I've known Jacob Zimmerman for 10 years, since he was just a boy with big dreams. I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." "Don't be ridiculous," Victoria protested, her cheeks heating. "He feels responsible for me, that's all, because of his sister." Mrs. Winters snorted. "That's how it started, maybe, but responsibility doesn't make a man ride 5 miles in a thunderstorm because he's worried about a tree near your cabin." She patted the bed. "Get some sleep, dear. And think on what I've said." After the older woman left, Victoria sat on the edge of Jacob's bed, surrounded by his things, his books on the shelf, his clothes in the wardrobe, his watch on the bedside table. The room smelled of him leather, tobacco, and something uniquely Jacob that she couldn't name. She slipped between the sheets, oddly comforted by the masculine surroundings. As the storm continued to rage outside, Victoria found herself wondering if Mrs. Winters could possibly be right. Could Jacob see her as more than a charity case, more than his sister's ghost? The thought should have scandalized her. Instead, it filled her with a warm flutter of hope she hadn't felt in months. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a washed clean world and considerable damage to the ranch. Victoria woke to find the house already empty, the men out assessing and repairing what the tempest had wrought. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, where Mrs. Winters was preparing a massive breakfast. "The men will be starving when they come in," the cook explained. "Storm damage all over. Your cabin roof is being fixed first, though boss's orders." Victoria immediately set to helping, and within an hour they had a feast ready just as the ranch hands trooped in, mud splattered and ravenous. Jacob came in last, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Damage isn't as bad as I feared," he announced, accepting the coffee Victoria handed him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Victoria felt that same flutter in her chest. "How's my cabin?" she asked. "Should be patched up by this afternoon," he replied. "The tree took out part of the roof, but Tom and the boys are good with repairs." "Thank you," Victoria said, meaning it for more than just the roof. Jacob met her eyes over his coffee cup, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing connection that neither had put into words. The moment was broken by a ranch hand calling Jacob's attention to a problem with the horses, and the day resumed its busy pace. But that night, as Victoria prepared for bed in her newly repaired cabin, she found herself thinking of blue eyes and gentle hands, and the possibility that her life might still hold joy after so much pain. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to the Double Z. The fall roundup began, with cattle being gathered for market and winter preparations accelerating before the first snow. Victoria's duties increased as she helped prepare meals for the extra hands hired for the season. Her pregnancy advanced to its final stages, her movements becoming more labored, her back constantly aching. Jacob insisted she take more rest, even hiring a girl from a neighboring ranch to help with the heavier work. "You're too stubborn for your own good," he told her one evening when he found her mending shirts well past her usual bedtime. "I won't be a burden," she replied, not looking up from her needle. Jacob crossed the room and gently took the mending from her hands. "You're not a burden, Victoria. You're expecting a child. There's a difference." The tenderness in his voice made her look up, and she found his face closer than expected. For a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he straightened and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller arrives tomorrow," he said. "She'll stay until after the baby comes." "Thank you," Victoria managed, her heart still racing from their near contact. "Jacob, I don't know what I would have done without your kindness these past months." A shadow crossed his face. "I only wish someone had shown such kindness to Marion." It was the first time he had mentioned his sister by name. Victoria set aside her sewing completely. "Tell me about her," she said softly. Jacob hesitated, then sat in the chair opposite hers. "Marion was 4 years younger than me. Our parents died of influenza when I was 18 and she was 14. I raised her after that, or tried to." He stared into the fire. "She was smarter than me, beautiful too, had suitors lining up when she turned 17. Victoria waited, sensing there was more. "One of them was the son of the biggest rancher in the county, Charles Blackstone. Charming, educated back east, promised her the world." Jacob's voice hardened. "I was driving a herd to Kansas City when it happened. She wrote me that they were in love, that they'd be married when I returned." He fell silent for so long that Victoria thought he might not continue. "When I got back 2 months later, I found she'd been cast out of our home by the town council. She was pregnant, and Blackstone had denied everything, claimed she'd been with multiple men, that the child couldn't be his. The town believed him. His family had money, influence." Jacob's hands clenched into fists. "She was living in a shack outside town, sick, half-starved. I got her to a doctor, but—" His voice broke. "She died that night. The baby, too." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jacob." "I wanted to kill him," he continued, his voice low and dangerous. "I would have if Tom hadn't stopped me. Instead, I used every penny I had to buy this land, to build something that would outlast Blackstone's legacy. He died 2 years ago drunk, fell from his horse. Never admitted what he did to Marion." Victoria reached across the space between them and took his hand. "She would be proud of what you've built." Jacob's fingers closed around hers. "Maybe, but I failed her when it mattered most. I won't fail you, Victoria, I promise you that." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. There was protection there, yes, but something more, something that looked remarkably like longing. Before she could respond, the baby kicked sharply, making her wince. Jacob's eyes dropped to her belly, and a different emotion crossed his face, wonder mingled with sadness. "You should rest," he said, releasing her hand and standing. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night, Jacob," she replied, watching him go with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite unravel. Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, arrived the next day, a brisk, competent woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of Victoria's care. "You've been doing too much," she scolded after examining her. "From now on, you're to rest in the afternoons and avoid stairs as much as possible." Victoria found herself sequestered in her cabin much of the time, with Mrs. Winters and Mrs. Miller taking turns keeping her company. The enforced idleness chafed, but she had to admit her body needed the rest. Jacob visited each evening, often bringing a book to read aloud or news from the ranch to distract her. These quiet evenings became the highlight of Victoria's days. Sometimes they talked for hours, about everything and nothing: his plans for the ranch, her former life as a teacher, books they had both read. One such evening, as November's chills settled over the land, Jacob arrived with a small wooden cradle. "Tom made it," he explained, setting it carefully by the fire. "Every baby needs a proper place to sleep." Victoria ran her hand over the smooth wood, tears springing to her eyes at the simple kindness. "It's beautiful." Jacob watched her, something soft in his expression. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." Victoria's heart skipped. "Yes. What are your plans, after the baby comes, I mean?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. I assumed I would continue working here if you'll have me." Jacob nodded slowly. "Of course, your position is secure, but I wondered if you might consider." He paused, seeming to search for words. "That is, I thought perhaps." A sharp knock at the door interrupted him. Mrs. Miller stood there, her expression grave. "Mr. Zimmerman, there are visitors from Las Animas." Jacob's expression hardened. "Who?" "The pastor and Mayor Phillips. They're asking for Miss Farrow." Victoria felt cold dread wash through her. "What do they want?" "They didn't say," Mrs. Miller replied, "but they seem determined." Jacob stood. "Tell them Miss Farrow is resting and cannot be disturbed." "Jacob," Victoria said, struggling to her feet, "I can't hide forever. I'll see them." He turned to her, concern etched on his features. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "Whatever they've come to say, I need to hear it." Jacob studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but not here. In the main house with me present." 20 minutes later, Victoria sat in Jacob's parlor, facing Pastor Williams and Mayor Phillips across the polished oak coffee table. Jacob stood behind her chair, a steady presence at her back. "Miss Farrow," the pastor began, "we've come to discuss your situation." "My situation is no longer your concern," Victoria replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Zimmerman has kindly provided me with employment and lodging." Mayor Phillips cleared his throat. "Yes, well, that's precisely what we've come to discuss. Your arrangement here has become the subject of considerable talk in Las Animas." "Has it?" Jacob's voice was dangerously calm. "I wasn't aware my employment decisions were subject to town approval." "Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be," Pastor Williams said smoothly. "But these circumstances are far from normal. An unmarried woman in Miss Farrow's condition, living alone on a ranch owned by a bachelor." He spread his hands. "Surely you can see how this appears." Victoria felt her cheeks burn with renewed shame, but before she could speak, Jacob stepped forward. "Miss Farrow has separate quarters and is chaperoned by my cook and now by Mrs. Miller. There has been no impropriety." His voice was cold with controlled anger. "Which is more than I can say for a town that cast out a woman in need." "We acted in accordance with moral principles," the pastor insisted. "The school board could not allow a woman of questionable virtue to teach impressionable children." "Questionable virtue," Jacob repeated incredulously. She was deceived by a married man who claimed to be a widower. Where is your Christian charity, Pastor? The men shifted uncomfortably, and Victoria realized with a start that Jacob's defense of her character was more than she had received from anyone in Las Animas, even those who had once called themselves her friends. That may be, Mayor Phillips admitted reluctantly. But the fact remains her presence here in your household is causing talk. We're concerned for your reputation, Mr. Zimmerman. My reputation is my own concern, Jacob replied firmly. Now, if you've finished, Miss Farrow needs her rest. The men exchanged glances. Actually, the pastor said, we have a proposal. The widow Jenkins has offered to take Miss Farrow in until after her confinement. She would then be welcome to return to Las Animas, provided she gives up the child for adoption to a proper family. Victoria gasped, her hand instinctively covering her belly. Give up my baby. It would be for the best, Mayor Phillips assured her. A fresh start. You could even return to teaching eventually once the scandal has died down. Victoria felt as if the room were spinning. Give up her child. Return to the town that had rejected her. The very thought made her physically ill. No, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, then stronger. No, I will not give up my child. Miss Farrow, Pastor Williams leaned forward, his expression stern. Consider your situation. An unmarried mother has no place in respectable society. The child will bear the stain of illegitimacy forever. Is that what you want? What I want, Victoria replied, finding strength in her rising anger, is to raise my child with love and dignity, away from people who would judge an innocent baby for circumstances beyond its control. The pastor's face hardened. Then I'm afraid Las Animas cannot welcome you back under any circumstances. The moral fabric of our community must be preserved. Enough. Jacob's voice cut through the room like a whip. You've made your proposal and Miss Farrow has declined. There's nothing more to discuss. There is one more thing, Mayor Phillips said, his expression suddenly cunning. We've had word from the Chicago Cattle Company. They're sending a representative next week, a Mr. Preston. I believe that's the name of the man who Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. Walter Preston. The very same, the mayor confirmed with smug satisfaction. Apparently, he's been appointed their new regional buyer. He'll be working this territory regularly. The news hit Victoria like a physical blow. The father of her child, the man who had lied to her, seduced her, and abandoned her, would be returning to the area. Would he try to see her? Deny the child? The possibilities made her head spin. Jacob's hand came to rest on her shoulder, steadying her. Gentlemen, I think we've heard enough. Tom will show you out. As if summoned, the foreman appeared in the doorway. The two men from Las Animas rose reluctantly, clearly disappointed that their news hadn't produced a more dramatic reaction. Think on what we've said, Miss Farrow, Pastor Williams urged as he reached the door. It's not too late to make the right choice. When they were gone, Victoria sagged in her chair, trembling. Are you all right? Jacob asked, kneeling before her, his face creased with concern. He's coming back, she whispered. Walter, or whatever his real name is. What if he tries to take the baby? What if his wife comes looking for me? What if... SHH, Jacob took her hands in his. Listen to me, Victoria. No one is taking your child. No one is going to hurt you. Do you understand? I won't allow it. The fierceness in his voice penetrated her panic. She looked into his eyes and saw absolute determination there. But what about what they said? About the talk in town? She asked. Jacob's jaw tightened. I don't give a damn what they say in town. But your business, your reputation, mean nothing compared to your safety and peace of mind. He squeezed her hands gently. Victoria, I need you to hear me. When I brought you to the Double Z, it was because I couldn't stand by and watch another woman suffer as my sister did. But these past months, watching you work so hard, seeing your strength and dignity in the face of everything, it's become much more than that." Victoria's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Jacob?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after losing Marion, the thought of that man coming back, of him hurting you again." His eyes darkened with anger, then softened as they met hers. "I won't let it happen, whatever I have to do." Victoria was speechless. The revelation of his feelings, so unexpected yet somehow exactly what her heart had been hoping for, left her stunned. "You don't have to say anything now," Jacob continued, misinterpreting her silence. "I know this is sudden and with the baby coming. I just wanted you to know you're not alone in this." Victoria found her voice at last. "Jacob," she said softly, "I care for you too, more than I can say. But are you certain? A woman with my past carrying another man's child." "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "Your past doesn't frighten me, Victoria. It's your future I want to be part of, yours and the child's." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, not tears of shame or fear, but of a joy she had not dared hope for. Before she could respond, however, a sharp pain knifed through her abdomen, stealing her breath. "Victoria!" Jacob's concern sharpened to alarm as she doubled over, clutching her belly. "What is it, the baby?" she gasped. "I think it's time." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Victoria. Mrs. Miller took charge immediately, sending Jacob from the room and transforming the bedroom into a makeshift birthing chamber. "It's too early," Victoria cried as another contraction seized her. "The baby's not due for 2 more weeks." "Babies come when they're ready," Mrs. Miller replied calmly, pressing a cool cloth to Victoria's forehead. "And this one's ready now." Outside the room, Jacob paced the hallway like a caged lion, flinching at every cry that came from within. Tom had been dispatched to fetch Dr. Miller, but a broken wagon wheel had delayed him on the road. The labor progressed rapidly, too rapidly, in Mrs. Miller's experienced opinion. "The stress of those men's visit likely brought it on," she told Victoria between contractions. "But don't you worry. Everything looks normal." Victoria had never known such pain, nor such fear. What if something went wrong? What if the baby wasn't healthy? And beneath these immediate concerns lay a deeper anxiety. What kind of life could she provide for a child born under such circumstances? As dawn broke, Victoria's labor reached its peak. With a final, tremendous effort, she brought her child into the world, a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair and a powerful set of lungs. "Look at that, Mrs. Miller said triumphantly, cleaning the squalling infant before placing him in Victoria's arms. "Perfect in every way." Victoria stared down at her son in wonder. All the pain, the shame, the fear, none of it mattered now as she counted tiny fingers and toes, as she felt the weight of him against her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mother." Outside the door, Jacob had heard the baby's first cry and sagged against the wall in relief. When Mrs. Miller finally emerged, her apron stained but her face wreathed in smiles, he straightened immediately. "Miss Farrow has a fine son," she announced. "Both are doing well." "Thank God," Jacob breathed. "Can I see them?" Mrs. Miller hesitated. "She's very tired." "Perhaps later, please," he interrupted. "Just for a moment." Something in his face must have convinced her, for she nodded and stepped aside. Jacob entered the room quietly, his eyes immediately finding Victoria in the bed, cradling a small bundle. She looked exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with a mother's love as she gazed down at her child. She looked up as he approached, and the smile she gave him nearly stopped his heart. "Jacob," she said softly, "meet my son." He moved to the bedside, looking down at the tiny red face nestled against Victoria's breast. The baby's eyes were tightly shut, his little mouth working in sleep. "He's beautiful," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." Victoria's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Would you like to hold him?" Jacob looked startled. "I don't know how." "Like this," she said, demonstrating how to support the baby's head as she carefully transferred her son to Jacob's arms. The moment was transformative. Jacob stared down at the infant with an expression of such tenderness that Victoria felt her heart might burst. This strong, capable man, who could break a wild horse and face down armed outlaws, looked utterly overcome by the tiny life in his arms. "Does he have a name?" Jacob asked, gently rocking the baby when he stirred. Victoria nodded. "James, after my father. James Farrow," Jacob tested the name. "It's strong, like he'll be." "James Jacob Farrow," Victoria corrected softly, "if that's all right with you." Jacob's eyes shot to hers, wide with surprise and something deeper. "You'd name him after me. You saved us both," Victoria said simply. "Without you, I don't know where we would be." For a moment, Jacob looked as if he might weep. Then he carefully handed the baby back to Victoria and took her free hand in his. "Victoria," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I know this isn't the proper time and I have no right to ask, but I can't wait any longer." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me? Let me be a father to James, a husband to you. I swear I'll love you both with everything I have, protect you with my life if needed." Victoria stared at him, overwhelmed. "Jacob, are you certain? The gossip, the scandal, let them talk," he said firmly. "I love you, Victoria Farrow. I think I have since that first night, watching you hold your head high despite everything. Say yes. Make us a family." Victoria looked from Jacob to her son and back again. The choice was clear, had perhaps been clear from the moment he'd offered her his hand that fateful evening. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jacob, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. He leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion, a promise of the life they would build together. Between them, little James stirred and yawned, oblivious to the momentous decision that had just shaped his future. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony performed by a justice of the peace from Pueblo. Jacob had refused to ask Pastor Williams to officiate, despite the man's offer and obvious attempt to mend relations after learning of Jacob's intention to marry Victoria. The ranch hands served as witnesses, along with Mrs. Winters, Mrs. Miller, and Tom Becker and his wife. The bride wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Jacob had specially ordered from Denver and carried a bouquet of winter greenery. James, dressed in a christening gown Mrs. Winters had sewn, slept peacefully in Mrs. Miller's arms throughout the ceremony. "I, Jacob William Zimmerman, take thee, Victoria Eleanor Farrow, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Jacob recited, his voice strong and sure as he slipped a gold band onto Victoria's finger. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Victoria's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her vows, still hardly believing this moment was real. The justice pronounced them husband and wife, and Jacob kissed her with such tenderness that several of the ranch hands cleared their throats awkwardly. The small reception that followed was joyous, with music provided by one of the cowboys on fiddle and another on harmonica. They danced in the parlor, Jacob holding Victoria as if she were made of precious glass, his eyes never leaving her face. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he murmured as they swayed to the music. "How does it sound?" "Perfect," she replied, resting her head against his chest. like it was always meant to be. Later, after the guests had departed and James was settled in his cradle in what was now their bedroom, Jacob took Victoria in his arms. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a folded document. "A wedding gift." Victoria opened it curiously, then gasped as she read the legal language. "Jacob, this is the deed to the Double Z," he confirmed, "with your name added as co-owner. What's mine is yours now, Victoria. This ranch, this life, it belongs to both of us." Tears sprang to her eyes at the enormity of the gesture. "I don't know what to say." Jacob smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Say you'll help me make it even better. For James, and maybe someday, for brothers and sisters to keep him company." Victoria's heart swelled with love. "Yes," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Yes to all of it." Their kiss sealed more than a marriage, it sealed a promise of a future built on mutual respect, understanding, and a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. The news of their marriage spread quickly through the county. Reactions were mixed, some congratulated them sincerely. Others whispered behind their hands about the scandalous haste, the baby's parentage, Victoria's past. Jacob ignored it all with magnificent indifference. "Let them talk," he said whenever Victoria mentioned a particularly pointed comment or cold shoulder. "We know the truth of our family." Family. The word warmed Victoria from within each time she heard it. After months of shame and isolation, she had found not only acceptance but love, a husband who adored her, a son who thrived under their care, a home where she belonged completely. As winter settled over the Double Z, Victoria adapted to her new roles as wife, mother, and ranch mistress. Jacob had insisted on hiring additional help so she wouldn't be overwhelmed, but Victoria found she enjoyed overseeing the household, making improvements to the main house, planning for the ranch's future alongside her husband. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, James sleeping in his cradle nearby, and talk of their dreams. Jacob wanted to expand the ranch, improve their breeding stock, perhaps add sheep to diversify. Victoria spoke of starting a small school for the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteads, of planting an orchard come spring, of the family they would build together. "I never thought I'd have this," she admitted one snowy night as they lay in bed, her head on Jacob's chest. "After everything that happened, I thought that part of my life was over." Jacob's arms tightened around her. "I felt the same after Marion died. Thought I'd just build the ranch, grow old alone." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank God I was wrong." Their peaceful existence was interrupted in early February when Tom Becker rode in from town with news. Walter Preston had arrived in Los Animas and was asking questions about Victoria. "Said he heard she'd had his child," Tom reported grimly. "Wants to see the baby." Victoria clutched James closer to her breast, panic rising in her throat. "He can't take him, can he? Legally?" Jacob's face was like stone. "No, you're married now, and I've legally adopted James as my son. Preston has no claim." "But what if he tries?" Victoria persisted. "What if he comes here?" Jacob exchanged a look with Tom. "Then he'll regret it." The threat in his voice should have frightened Victoria, but instead it reassured her. Jacob would protect them with his life if necessary. "What about his wife?" she asked, remembering Mrs. Henderson's revelation. "Is she with him?" Tom shook his head. "No, madam. And from what I gathered at the saloon, there might not be a wife at all. Seems Preston spins different tales in different towns." This news was somehow more disturbing than the thought of an angry wife. If Preston had lied about being married, what else had he lied about? What did he really want with James? They didn't have to wait long to find out. The very next day, as Victoria was hanging laundry in the crisp winter air, The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the road. A well-dressed man on an expensive horse was approaching, followed by a second rider she recognized as Mayor Phillips. Jacob, who had been working in the barn, emerged immediately, positioning himself between the approaching men and Victoria. Tom and two other ranch hands materialized from various points around the property, rifles casually but visibly present. "Stay inside," Jacob instructed Victoria. "Take James to our room and stay there until I come for you." For once, Victoria didn't argue. She gathered her son from his bassinet on the porch and retreated into the house, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched the confrontation unfold. The man dismounting was handsome in a polished way, his clothing too fine for the frontier, his manner too smooth. Walter Preston, the man who had courted her, promised her marriage, and then vanished when she told him she was carrying his child. "Mr. Zimmerman," Preston called, removing his hat with a flourish. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jacob remained where he was, his stance deceptively relaxed. "There's nothing here that belongs to you, Preston, or whatever your real name is." Preston smiled thinly. "Walter Preston is indeed my name, and I'm here about my son. I understand Victoria Farrow gave birth to a boy in November." "My wife's name is Victoria Zimmerman," Jacob corrected coldly, "and our son is none of your concern." Preston's smile faltered. "Your wife, I see. How convenient for her to find a husband so quickly." He turned to Mayor Phillips. "You didn't mention she had married." The mayor shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "It was rather sudden, after the child was born, indeed." Preston's eyes narrowed as he returned his attention to Jacob. "Nevertheless, the boy is my blood. I have a right to see him, to acknowledge him." "You had that right when Victoria told you she was expecting," Jacob replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "You chose to disappear instead. Now you've lost any claim you might have had." From her vantage point at the window, Victoria could see Preston's face harden. "I'll take this to a judge if necessary. I have rights as the natural father." "Do you?" Jacob took a step forward. "A judge might be interested to hear how you represented yourself as a widower to seduce a respectable woman, or how you've apparently told similar lies in other towns." Preston's composure slipped for an instant. "That's hearsay." "Is it?" Jacob glanced at Mayor Phillips. "Your own associate here confirmed that you claimed to have a wife who was looking for you. Which is it, Preston, widower or married man, or just a liar who preys on vulnerable women?" Preston's hand drifted toward his coat, and instantly Tom and the ranch hands raised their rifles. "I wouldn't," Jacob advised quietly. "My men are very protective of their mistress and young master." For a tense moment, Victoria thought violence would erupt in her front yard. Then Preston slowly moved his hand away from whatever weapon he might have been carrying. "This isn't over, Zimmerman," he said through gritted teeth. "That boy has Preston blood. I'll be back with a court order." "You do that," Jacob replied evenly. "In the meantime, you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you leave before my men get nervous with those rifles." Preston glared for a moment longer, then jammed his hat back on his head and remounted his horse. "Mayor, we're leaving." Mayor Phillips, who had watched the exchange with evident discomfort, nodded hastily. "Yes, of course. Mr. Zimmerman, please convey our respects to Mrs. Zimmerman." Jacob didn't acknowledge the platitude, standing motionless until both men had ridden well beyond the ranch boundaries. Only then did he turn and stride quickly toward the house. Victoria met him at the door, James cradled in her arms. "What will happen now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jacob's expression softened as he looked at her and the baby. "Nothing," he assured her, guiding her to a chair. "Preston's threats are empty. No court would side with him over us, especially given his deception. But what if, Victoria, Jacob knelt before her, taking her free hand in his. I swore to protect you and James, and I will. Preston won't get anywhere near either of you again. She searched his face and found only certainty there. How can you be so sure? Because I've already spoken to Judge Harrison in Pueblo about formally adopting James, Jacob explained. The papers were filed last week. In the eyes of the law, he's my son in every way that matters. Fresh tears sprang to Victoria's eyes, tears of relief and gratitude. You did that. Without telling me. I wanted it to be settled before Preston showed up, Jacob admitted. I knew it was only a matter of time. Victoria leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the contact. Thank you, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for making us a real family. Jacob smiled, reaching out to stroke James's downy head. We were already a real family. The papers just make it official for everyone else. True to Jacob's prediction, Preston's threats came to nothing. Judge Harrison, a friend of the Zimmermans, had indeed processed the adoption papers with unusual speed, ensuring that James was legally Jacob's son. When Preston returned 2 weeks later with a Denver lawyer in tow, they left empty-handed and furious. The judge informed them that pressing the matter would only expose Preston's fraudulent behavior in multiple counties. Jacob reported to Victoria afterward. Apparently, our Mr. Preston has a history of promising marriage to women across the territory. His lawyer advised him to drop the case. Will he? Victoria asked, still anxious. Jacob nodded confidently. He values his reputation too much to have his activities made public. We won't see him again. Jacob's certainty proved correct. Walter Preston left Las Animas the next day and was never seen in the area again. With his departure, the last shadow over Victoria's new life lifted. Spring came to the Double Z in a riot of wildflowers and new life. Calves frolicked in the pastures, and Jacob's expanded breeding program began to show promising results. Victoria started a small vegetable garden and worked with the ranch hands to plant the orchard she had dreamed of during the winter months. James thrived, growing from a newborn to an alert, smiling infant who captivated everyone around him. He had Victoria's eyes and Jacob's strong chin, a combination that made them both laugh with delight. He's going to be handsome like his pa, Mrs. Winters declared as she watched Jacob tossing the baby gently in the air, James's delighted giggles filling the kitchen. Victoria smiled, knowing the older woman meant Jacob, not Preston. In every way that mattered, Jacob was James's father in the rocking when he cried at night, in the proud way he carried him around the ranch, in the plans he made for teaching him to ride and rope when he was older. As summer approached, Victoria received an unexpected letter from Las Animas. It was from her former assistant at the school, Mary Wilson, informing her that the school board was seeking a new teacher and wondering if Victoria might be interested in applying. They regret their harsh treatment of you, Mary wrote. Your marriage to Mr. Zimmerman has restored your standing in the community's eyes, and many parents have expressed a wish for your return. Victoria read the letter to Jacob that evening, uncertain how to feel about the invitation. What do you think? She asked as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. James slept peacefully in his father's arms, tiny fists curled against Jacob's shirt. Jacob considered for a moment. Do you miss teaching? Yes, Victoria admitted, but I don't miss Las Animas or the people who judged me so harshly. Then don't go back, Jacob said simply. Start that school here, like you've been talking about. The bunkhouse we're not using could be converted. There are 15 children within riding distance whose parents would welcome proper education. Victoria's eyes lit up. You'd support that. Jacob laughed softly, careful not to wake James. "Victoria, I'd support anything that makes you happy. Besides, our son will need schooling someday too, and maybe his brothers and sisters." The implication made Victoria blush. "Are you suggesting we should give James siblings?" Jacob's smile turned tender as he looked at her. "I'm suggesting that I love being a father and that I love you more each day. The rest is up to you." Victoria leaned against her husband, contentment washing through her. "I'd like that," she said softly. "A house full of children, a school full of students, a life built together." "Then that's what we'll have," Jacob promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. True to their vision, the summer saw the conversion of the unused bunkhouse into a schoolhouse. Victoria sent word to neighboring ranches and homesteads. And by September, 12 students of varying ages were attending daily lessons at what they proudly called the Double Z School. Victoria found that motherhood and teaching complemented each other beautifully. James stayed with her during school hours, adored by the students, who took turns holding him during their breaks. Jacob often stopped by to watch his wife in her element, pride evident in every line of his face. As winter approached again, bringing with it the first anniversary of their marriage, Victoria had news of her own to share. She waited until they were alone one evening, James already asleep in his crib. "Jacob," she said as they sat before the fire, "do you remember what you said last spring about giving James siblings?" He looked up from his book, a slow smile spreading across his face as he understood her meaning. "Victoria, are you saying?" She nodded, her own smile radiant. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're expecting a baby in late May." Jacob was across the room in an instant, gathering her into his arms and lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby," he breathed, setting her down gently. "Our baby." The emphasis on "our" wasn't lost on Victoria. As much as Jacob loved James, this child would be different conceived in love, born of their union, a living symbol of the family they had created together. "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Jacob replied, kissing her deeply. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Victoria. A son, a wife, and now another child. I'm the luckiest man in Colorado." Victoria laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "And I'm the luckiest woman. From shame to joy in a single year, who would have believed it?" Jacob tilted her face up to his. "I believed in you from the first moment, Victoria. Your strength, your dignity, your heart, they're what I fell in love with. The rest was just noise." As they stood wrapped in each other's arms, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the darkest moment of her life, cast out and alone on that dusty street, to this pinnacle of happiness. Secure in the love of a good man, surrounded by a life they were building together. The townspeople of Las Animas still gossiped, of course. Some said Jacob had married her out of pity, others that she had trapped him somehow. But as time passed, and the Zimmerman family thrived, welcoming a daughter, Emma, the following spring, and eventually 2 more sons in the years that followed, even the most determined gossips found little to criticize. The Double Z prospered under their joint stewardship, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the county. The little school Victoria had started grew to 30 students, eventually requiring the construction of a proper schoolhouse and the hiring of an assistant teacher. James grew into a strong, kind young man who called Jacob Pa, and never questioned the love that had shaped his childhood. When he was 12, Jacob and Victoria told him the truth of his birth, not as a shameful secret, but as part of the miraculous story that had brought their family together. "So Pa isn't my real father?" James had asked, confusion evident in his expression. "Your Pa is your real father in every way that matters," Victoria had explained gently. He chose you, James. He chose us both. Understanding had dawned in the boy's eyes then, followed by a fierce love as he'd thrown his arms around Jacob. You're my pa, he'd stated with absolute certainty. The only one I'll ever need. On their 20th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the orchard Victoria had planted all those years ago, the trees now tall and laden with fruit, Jacob took his wife's hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Any regrets? He asked softly. Victoria looked around at the life they had built, the thriving ranch, the school that had educated a generation of children, their 4 healthy, happy offspring, and the man who had stood between her and a town's judgment when she needed it most. Not one, she replied, her heart full to bursting. Not a single one. In the distance, Las Animas was visible as a cluster of buildings on the horizon, a reminder of where their story had begun, but no longer a place that held any power over them. They had created their own world at the Double Z, a world built on love, acceptance, and second chances. Victoria leaned against her husband's shoulder, grateful beyond words for the cowboy who had seen past her shame to the woman beneath and in doing so, had given her not just shelter, but a home in every sense of the word.